Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is J.D. Jean-Daniel Nolan, along with Paul Devlin. I am the co-chair, Paul's the other co-chair of the Hell's Kitchen Clinton Land Use Committee, Manhattan Community Board 4. This is our regular monthly meeting for March 2023. We're still doing this remote, although as you know, it's recorded on YouTube. And we have on the agenda tonight, we have a presentation from Mr. John Sanchez of the 5 Borough Movement. Going around to all the community boards, we'll take questions from the committee after his presentation and then from the public if they want to weigh in. And Janine, if members of the public are with us tonight, how can they call in?
Please use the raise hand function to ask questions, or if you're on the phone, you can do *6 and *9 to unmute and speak.
Thank you, Janine. And Janine is our community associate. So she's running this meeting. So you'll call this shot. So while we're waiting, let's just go around to make sure everybody knows who's on the committee. I'm JD. I'm co-chair along with Mr. Devlin. Paul?
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Devlin, co-chair with JD on this committee, also serve on the Chelsea Land Use Committee. I'll pass it over to Frank.
Hi, I'm Frank Hall-Zubiak, a member of the committee and Community Board 4.
And you want to pass it on to Leslie. I see Leslie up top there.
Hi, Leslie Williams, member of the committee.
And Leslie passes it to Ted. I see Ted at the bottom.
Hi, I'm Ted, a member of the committee. How are you tonight?
Good, Ted. You want to pass it on to Brian?
Hi, thank you, JD. I'm Brian Weber. I'm a public member on the Land Use Committee, and good to be here.
Welcome, Brian. Yadira.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Yadira Jimenez, a member, and I'll pass it to Dolores.
Yeah. Bravo. Bravo.
Oh, right. I like that audible. Look at that. So I'm Dolores Rubin, and I'm also a member of the committee.
And you're going to pass it on to David?
I can't see anybody. I'm sorry.
All right. David Solnick, welcome.
Hi, everybody. David Solnick, member. Happy to be here.
Welcome, David. And Chris, I see you there. Can't hear you. Well, okay.
Hold on, wait 1 second. No, I double mute myself just in case, God forbid. Okay. So my name is Chris LeBron. I'm a member of the committee. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Chris. And last but not least, Mr. Restucci.
Joe Restucci, member of the committee.
Welcome, Joe. Welcome, everybody.
With a much better connection than when I first started. Sorry.
Okay. Also, one thing, this presentation tonight from Mr. Sanchez will also go to the Chelsea Land Use Committee. Is that right, Paul?
Yes. And then we'll do a joint letter from both committees.
Okay, so if anybody wants to grill Mr. Sanchez more, they can go to the Chelsea Land Use Committee. Paul, when is that meeting?
I have to look at my calendar. Janine probably knows better than I do.
I think it's on the 20th.
Yeah, sorry. I wake up every day and whatever's on my calendar, I attend.
Okay. So welcome, everybody. While we're waiting for Mr. Sanchez, I'm going to ask Joe. Joe, I know you meet regularly with the Port Authority Working Group, which is comprised of the Land Use and Transportation and Hell's Kitchen South Coalition and the Housing Committee. Any new developments since we gave an update last month about the Port Authority?
Somewhat. We have an upcoming meeting scheduled for March 29th. The Port Authority Working Group is pretty much starting to work again now that the Port Authority is available. And we know the following pieces of information: that they expect the draft environmental impact statement to be completed sometime this summer. We actually was another meeting with someone else from the port today and made it clear that we don't want it dropped on us on end of July. So we have to comment on it during August. That would be really not good considering how long we've worked on this project together. If it's completed sometime this summer, they're looking to have a ULURP certified for the project sometime between the end of the year and the first quarter of next year. So that would take us through on a ULURP clock to the middle of 2024 to get to final approval. What I can let people know from the last working group, the back and forth issues with the Port Authority, Department of City Planning, and the Mayor's Office have centered around payments called pilots, payments in lieu of real estate taxes. The port is trying to make sure that it can capture as much from payments that would go to the city normally for real estate taxes, and instead have some of them go to the Port Authority when new buildings are developed above the existing terminal. Why is that important? That creates an income stream to pay debt service on bonds. The Port Authority is going to be issuing bonds without question for this project, in addition to capital money coming from the state and also from the federal government. So that's a big sort of back and forth bone of contention. At our last meeting, there were some changes made at the request of Department of City Planning to move some of the entrances for the 9th Avenue entrance for the terminal and the 10th Avenue entrance for the West Terminal. And it was contrary to agreements that we had already reached with the port, that the idea would be to reknit the neighborhood together and have continuous retail along 9th Avenue between 40th and 41st Streets. The city planning decided to insert a mini plaza with like a triple height entrance. So we already have talked to the port and city planning about that. It's not something we want to do. We want to keep the human scale on 9th Avenue. But I will tell you, the project still remains in flux back and forth. And the first thing that they're working on, they have authorization right now to do the engineering studies, to do the decking over of the platforms between 37th and 38th Street and 39th Streets between 9th and 10th Avenues, where the park will be eventually. And that is being done specifically to create temporary bus staging and a temporary terminal while they build the new West Terminal between 40th, 39th and 40th over to 10th Avenue, and then eventually rebuild the existing terminal. So lots of moving pieces, and we'll report every month as we have a meeting.
Thanks, Joe. Does anybody have any questions about this huge project that's going on? Paul.
Joe, I know that it's been raised a bunch of times on the platforms and the engineering to make sure that they're stable enough for future park use, because isn't that platform eventually going to be converted to park use? Did that come up at all? Did they agree to that?
Yes. Both platforms between 37th and 39th Streets will be parks. And in fact, they have built into the engineering that will be deep enough to plant trees into, full-size trees. They have committed to that over and over now, which is fantastic.
They commit to everything and then they come back with a plan and it's different. So I just wanted to see that was still lining up.
They have committed that it's going to be reflected in their public approvals. So I think that's a good point right there.
Great. Awesome. Thanks.
And Joe, there are now 2 less towers than first planned.
Yes, the very big change that happened is the Department of City Planning requested that the ramps that pass over 10th Avenue, the new ones, would be higher. They were about 15, 16 feet from the sidewalk. In order to make those ramps higher, the Port Authority had to push, if you remember now, between 39th, between 40th and 41st Streets, right? Sorry, between 40th and 41st Streets is an area called Galvin Plaza. That's where you enter into the tunnel from the street. That entire block is going to be changed into a helix ramp. A helix ramp is one that spins around like this. In order for buses to exit from the tunnel, go up the helix, right to the ramp system, directly into the Port Authority bus terminal without touching the street. That was a huge concession that they made on this. So commuter buses would no longer go on the streets. However, with the request from city planning to make those ramps higher, they had to push the ramp helix structure further west. When you push the structure further west, it creates a higher ramp, but it makes it much more difficult to put a building around it on 11th Avenue between 39th and 40th, or a building around it on 10th Avenue. So they've eliminated 2 large buildings as part of this plan. Again, we may see them come back, but right now they said they've eliminated them. So that's a major thing. So the new construction will be on 42nd and 8th, appropriate large commercial building. And then somewhere between 9th and 10th, 40th to 41st Streets, closer to 9th.
Thanks, Joe. Brian, you have a question?
Yeah. Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask if the helix structure, if there's still discussion about enclosing the helix in a building or in a structure, so as we don't have the fumes venting to the street.
The helix will be enclosed. We're not certain about what the structure actually will be, but there's also going to be a requirement, Brian, for electric buses. So I think we're going to be seeing,
Right.
I think the technology is moving very quickly and the economics are moving quickly toward more electric buses, which helps a great deal on that issue.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Joe. David and then Christopher. David Solomon.
Yes, Joe, you mentioned the tower on 42nd and 8th and also over on 10th, between 9th and 10th. What about the tower between?
No, only between 8th and 9th. Nothing between 9th and 10th. Sorry, I misspoke.
Okay, between 8th and 9th on 40, so between 40th and 41st, right? I think that's right. Yeah, okay. Yep.
Thanks. Chris.
Joe, thank you so much for summarizing all the changes that are there with regard to the helix and capping that. Just as a note, I'm always going to be curious about what kind of air filtration system, air duct system that they're going to install there to ensure capture of CO2.
We continue to ask for that, but I am getting the sense more and more, given the time frame of this project, that there will be an electric bus mandate. So that's going to make a huge difference with this whole thing, how it impacts on our neighborhood.
And that is not going to be blocked by a student from New Jersey Transit, right?
No, it seems as if New Jersey Transit's with the Inflation Reduction Act is actually embracing electric buses as opposed to saying no. Fascinating to see a change.
I'm stunned. Thank you so much.
I see Mr. Sanchez is here. Maybe we can come back to the Port Authority conversation after he's done.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Mr. Sanchez, welcome.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I just got in from Albany. I'm in front of my computer and I'm ready to go. I appreciate your patience with me.
Well, welcome, Mr. Sanchez. If we can call you John, welcome. And we're glad you're here and not in Albany. So
yes.
Thank you for coming. We've opened the meeting. You see before you in the little squares the members of the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee tonight. So I know you have a shorter time than usual, perhaps. So I'm going to ask for you to, if you could, after your presentation, to take questions, if you could, and comment.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Without further ado, Mr. Sanchez, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Chair and members of the board. By way of background, I'm a former district manager in the Bronx, Community Board 6 for about 5 years. So I appreciate all the work that you all do. I'm now going to share my screen and get into the presentation. Can you all see the presentation? Okay, great. So good evening. So today I'm going to discuss my effort with the 5-borough housing movement, where I serve as executive director. And I'll be discussing our efforts to change state law around office to residential conversions. This effort really sprung out of the mayor and governor's effort to reimagine the city, realizing that people aren't working from the office 5 days a week. How can we have neighborhoods that are places where people can work, live, and play? The city of New York released a study determining how feasible it was for office conversions in January, detailing what are things on the state and city level that would be needed to make sure that office conversions are successful. This is short background on foot traffic patterns and bids. As we know, things are getting better south of 96th Street, but foot traffic has declined in the core employment hubs, and in the outer boroughs, there's been a slight uptick in foot traffic. We've even seen changes in consumer retail spending. As you can see, there's been decline south of 96th Street, but there have been increases in areas outside of the Manhattan core. And of course, we know that the Manhattan office market has changed. Vacancy rates have gone up and have persisted to go up, especially in Class B and Class C spaces, which are the older type of buildings, not the new modern ones, such as One Vanderbilt, et cetera. This is background. We understand that New York's in a housing crisis and that cities across the country are building more than we are. New Yorkers are leaving to several cities in the South, whether it be Dallas, Miami, or Atlanta. We also understand that housing production is unequal in New York City. As you can see, your community board ranks in the top 10 when it comes to housing production for the past 10 years. And we can't have a housing system in which 10 community boards are carrying half of the responsibility of providing housing. Ideally, we see a pie chart where every community board is included here doing their part. This is even more pronounced when it comes to affordable housing construction. From 2014 to 2021, you can see areas like mine in the Bronx have produced thousands of units of affordable housing, but other neighborhoods in the city have lagged behind. And if we are going to address this housing crisis, every neighborhood needs to share the responsibility of providing some affordable housing as well. As we know, Manhattan CB4 has been a leader on the issue. You've been proposing specific sites for housing development, which is good. And that's what we need more of. So this is what we're advocating for on the state level. We want to change the state law to allow for flexibility for office conversions. We want to allow for adjustments in the FAR cap where it makes sense in the city. And we want to make sure if there is office conversions, that there's a tax incentive for permanently affordable units as a part of these conversions. Right now, the state law is very confusing. It allows for conversions for buildings built before 1961. If buildings are built between 1961 and 1977, they can convert only if they're in Manhattan south of Murray Street. And buildings built after 1977 can't convert. What we're supportive of and what the Department of City Planning is recommending that there be a uniform threshold. Buildings built before 1990 have the option to convert, not a mandate, but just the option. In terms of the type of offices that would convert, it really depends on the floor plate and the size of the building. The smaller type of buildings, type 1, these are more typically seen in Soho and Tribeca. They have operable windows, smaller floor plates. They're easier to convert. Type 2 and type 3, these are buildings more typically seen in Midtown. They're more difficult to convert because they have big floor plates. They have big building cores. But we think a combination of all three would convert if they're given the option to. The next slide shows another visual of conversions that have happened already. 212 Fifth Avenue, this is on 26th and 5th Avenue. This is an easy type of conversion. It almost looks like an apartment building already. The windows work. This is a simple one. It's less expensive and it's easier to convert. This second one, 180 Water Street, this is more difficult to convert. This kind of looks like a municipal building downtown. Even though it's harder to convert, these type of buildings tend to yield more units. And now we're talking about the FAR cap. Right now, the state has a law from 1961, which limits density when it comes to housing. In terms of neighborhoods that would be impacted if the cap was lifted, we're really talking about Manhattan south of 96th Street, bits and pieces of Long Island City, parts of downtown Brooklyn. And it's important to know that there's about 400 buildings that were built before 1961 that exceed the cap today. They couldn't be built today. Many of them are in Manhattan. For those that don't know, floor area ratio, the square footage of all the floors in a building divided by the square footage of the lot. Right now, the cap is 12 for residential. There is no cap for commercial. These are visuals showing that buildings can have differing heights and the same FAR. So it's important to know that lifting the cap doesn't mean skyscrapers get built tomorrow. It just allows the city to determine where does a higher FAR make sense. Nothing gets constructed overnight, still goes through the ULURP process, the city review process, environmental review process. This just allows the city to determine where it makes sense rather than the state. In terms of how many units we think could be converted through conversions, a good guide is 421G program. This was a state program implemented for Lower Manhattan to revitalize a neighborhood. It produced around 13,000 units, 9,600 were rentals, 3,200 were condos. The big difference is that this program had no incentive for affordability. We're advocating for a new program that has an incentive for affordable units. In terms of areas that could potentially see conversions or FAR adjustments, there are bits and pieces in Manhattan Community Board 4. The map on the right shows that in some areas, residential is not permitted. So a rezoning would be required to allow for residential to be converted. Also, there are some buildings that were built post 1961 that if the state law changed, they could be eligible. But again, it's important to know that the state changing the law just allows the city to start its process. Nothing would happen overnight. These are some ancillary benefits we see from office conversions. Boost to transit ridership, considering that a lot of these office buildings are near subway stations. Also, improved quality of life. We understand that there's an uptick in quality of life crime, shoplifting, et cetera. If there are more eyes on the streets, that not only helps local businesses, but also helps public safety. And we also think that there are benefits for the construction projects. People from across the 5 boroughs can not only work on these projects, but potentially could live near their job sites. This is the last slide. These are just some of our partners that are supportive. We have the Garment District Alliance, which is supportive, Grand Central Partnership, East Midtown Partnership, even some environmental groups, because the environmental groups realize that retrofitting a building is less carbon intensive than brand new construction. You're reusing the steel and concrete rather than creating it from scratch. We also have several community boards from across the city that are supportive of this. And we want to make sure no matter what form this ultimately becomes in the final budget, that it's included in the budget and not lost in the shuffle. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions from the board.
John, thank you very much. I'm going to ask everybody if we can make our questions really precise, our comments, so everybody can be included. And John, I just want to make sure we're talking about 2 fundamental things. One is converting office into residential, and 2 is lifting the cap. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think the third thing would be an incentive for affordability for the conversions.
I gotcha. And when you say office, that's that's not commercial, that is commercial, that's a specific category.
Yes.
Only office.
Offices, yes, not hotels, no other, yeah.
Great. John, thank you. And please hang around. We've got good questions for you. Who wants to
I'm
start
here.
off? Thank you, John. And Joe, and then Brian. And unmute, Joe.
I think Chris had his hand up first.
Chris was first.
I'm sorry, I don't see you, Chris. Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Chris, your microphone's not working.
It's not that it's not working. Remember, I double mute. John, it's been a long time since we actually had a chance to talk. And I appreciate the presentation. There are a couple comments. I've noticed that most of the opportunities for upzoning are here in Midtown, West and East, but there are none in Ditmas, Forest Hills, Flushing, Brownsville, Ocean Hill, Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, East New York, Red Hook. There's none in Riverdale. And so I'm wondering why the project is identifying Democratic neighborhoods and not Republican neighborhoods where there are single family homes. This is troubling. Secondly, you said that the city doesn't necessarily, once given the power through the state to go through the ULURP process, is not turnaround. I was intimate in the Red Hook proposals as I was intimate with the Gowanus proposals. These things happen very quickly in city council with a speaker. It could take anywhere between 2 years to 8 months, especially if you have a very willing mayor. So it's the nuances are something that this committee is very familiar with. We're very educated in, and you're going to find that out throughout this question and answer process. But look, I gotta say there are points to this project that work. But giving full authority and full autonomy to the city that cannot properly regulate or fund NYCHA or public schools, I would not be willing to give any authority to the city on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, I'll give a quick response. When it comes to why we're looking at Midtown East and Midtown West, the simple fact is that 80% of office stock in New York City is in Manhattan south of 96th Street. There has been interest from the outer boroughs in terms of conversions, specifically downtown Flushing, Jamaica, Queens, also parts of the South Bronx. But the bulk of office conversions are going to be in Manhattan because of the sheer number of office buildings in Manhattan. In terms of the FAR cap, if the FAR cap was lifted, specific council members could look at upzoning some of the neighborhoods you mentioned, Riverdale, et cetera. In terms of the city not being competent, well, I can't speak to the city's competence, but I can speak to the city's desire to want to see more housing, and how that's done has to incorporate infrastructure, school needs, et cetera. But that can't begin unless the state restrictions are lifted. We can't even have that conversation unless that happens first.
I understand, but FAR up to 12 in special zoning districts like Hell's Kitchen are very important to preserve. It gives an opportunity for the community to have a voice. Whereas in areas like Ditmas and Ocean Park and Brownsville, Ocean Hill, and Flushing, Forest Hills, again, Kew Gardens, we're talking about places that have single family homes. There's no rental opportunity, and they have larger square mileage of opportunity in terms of potential for development for residential.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. It's just not our focus. Our focus is really the office conversion piece.
Chris, good question. Thank you, John. Joe.
Yeah, a few things, John. One is you have some maps to correct. The one map you showed with where there could be a FAR cap lifting, right? That I'm assuming you are concerned about areas that are currently zoned in FAR up to an FAR of 12, and you want to be able to go higher. Is that correct?
So that map was from the RPA study, and it detailed census tracts that have an FAR of 10 currently.
Right. So that map's incorrect. You encompassed what Chris spoke to. You encompassed our entire special zoning districts that do not have an FAR of 10. In the northern part of our district, from 42nd to 59th Streets along 8th Avenue, it's an FAR of 10. And in fact, is an FAR of 4.2 further west. So I'm going to work with JD to get you just a corrected map, because it creates a bad impression that you're seeking to upzone an area that has a residential lower FAR, as opposed to talking about the areas that are 10 to 12. So I'm assuming that was your intent, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then the second thing is that you have a slide about the conversions, right? And again, that doesn't quite match up with the underlying zoning. So I think we should be able to give you a markup on that, because one of the things, in order to get support and engagement from a community like ours who's very educated with this, your base data has to be correct. Otherwise, it's going to create an impression that you want to do something else. So those are two things. The last piece is that I recommend is our board has had a lot of very robust discussions about areas where we do have FAR exceeding 12, namely Hudson Yards, mostly along 11th Avenue in the West 30s, that's an area we'd like to look at piloting the possibility of moving up to a higher residential FAR, especially since the higher FARs that exist there run between 18 to FAR of 24 and 33. So that FAR exists. There's no environmental work to be done on the overall bulk. Of course, on residential changes, yes. But that's the kind of thing you need to bring to us or talk to us so we can help you on the targeted, specific surgical kind of intervention we can do, as opposed to getting involved in a major policy thing that it could, like, things could, a lot of times policy changes die on the vine, right? Because there's other issues that are wrapped around it. So have you considered Hudson Yards and how we could help you work on that?
Yes, I mean, if the community board were to, for example, provide a conditional letter of support saying we'd like to see a pilot program for Hudson Yards specifically, we'd have no issue with presenting that to elected officials. We had another community board vote recently last week in Queens, and they had some stipulations around affordability. And we welcome that because we know ultimately this is going to be negotiated in Albany in 3 weeks. What we're proposing will not be the final form. What community boards are supportive of won't be the final form. We just don't want this to get lost in the shuffle completely where none of it's included.
And the affordability part, we had already recommended in the 2015 rezoning of the Garment Center. So we'll send you that information along too, because we had been through this process already saying, if you convert, then you must have an affordability component. So we're very, very familiar with it.
Great.
Joe, thank you. John, you see, it's a tough committee, so you know, they're just vicious. And we got another vicious guy coming, Brian and then Dolores. Brian, go ahead.
Thanks, JD. Thanks for that introduction. I'm nasty. Just a few quick questions and points of clarification. You talk about commercial conversion. I know with the garment district, is that currently considered manufacturing, and does this conversion apply to manufacturing?
So that would require rezoning first, and then then there would have to be conversions.
Okay.
So it'd be a two-step process.
Right, because a substantial chunk of the garment district is overbuilt.
But Brian, it does apply to parts of the garment district that are in area A,
right,
A2, right? And it also applies to anything that has a C underlying zone. So parts of this do.
Yes. Part of this does apply to that. So the other question I have is about the 5-borough movement. The first I heard of it was I started seeing ads on the internet and in social media. And then when I saw you were coming to appear before our board, I visited your website. And it said paid for by the 5-borough movement. Who is the 5-borough movement, and who's financing the 5-borough movement?
Yeah, great question. Well, we have supporters from across industries. So the New York Building Congress is a supporter, the NAACP is a supporter, the Downtown Alliance, Grand Central Partnership, League of Conservation Voters. So pretty much.
I understand those are supporters who have joined on,
and funders.
But who? Okay, so they're the funders as well,
yes.
The financial backers. All right. I mean, for my point, I think the devil's always in the details. My concern is about releasing FAR caps. That's where I kind of sit with this, but I'm interested in hearing what the rest of the board has to say. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Brian, thank you. John, just to follow up to clarify Brian's comment, have all these groups signed on to your proposal entirely, or?
Yes.
Entirely.
Entirely. Every group that's listed on our website is supportive of the entire plan.
Dolores.
So John, I just want to say you're a great presenter. Really appreciated the clarity in how you presented to us. One of the things I want to echo some of the sentiment of Joe Restuccia, who just mentioned the land use activity and work that has occurred over the last 30 years within our community board district has been well thought out, very hard fought, and with a community consensus, which means that we happen to have very unique, land use markings throughout this entire community for the express purpose of ensuring not only the community fabric, but that it also includes the eye towards affordable housing. I mean, this is a community board which has been fighting for affordable housing well before many others, and ensure that in an area where we have such lucrative potential real estate deals, that we are asking for the maximum amount of affordability well before it was mandatory. The reason why I bring that up, it's very easy to go ahead and look at a map or look at the properties and say, this is ripe for putting in a lot of affordable housing. But what we don't think about are the unintended consequences of converting where the massive amount of commercial stock is. The office stock is here, but it does not mean that these particular parts of our community and neighborhoods can support that much more of residential. We have to think about where is the additional support coming for services like more fire, more police, school seats, extra schools, et cetera. So these are the unintended consequences of a very compact, crowded community already that has not fought to reduce the size overall of our buildings. Hudson Yards is an example, but we work with what we have and the services that we have. So that's a huge concern. And so while I am applauding every aspect of we'll call it the spirit of what you're trying to achieve, to Chris's point, we're focusing on an area that already has density. And there may be better solutions to our housing and affordable crisis in communities that have zero density and that fight very hard and have electeds that are behind them to ensure that their single family home areas remain single family home areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. I know our co-chair Paul is always very kind to wait until the end for his questions. Paul, do you mind if Yadira goes first and then we call on you?
I'll let Yadira go before me and then I'll wrap.
Great, thanks, Paul. Yadira.
Thank you. I just want to make it brief. First of all, Mr. Sanchez, thank you so much for your presentation. It is really, I guess, refreshing to know that so many people are trying to create affordable housing. We're in desperate need. But then I want to echo Dolores's concern about this neighborhood being just overwhelmed. And we also do have to consider the services, especially schools and firehouses for residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Yadira. Paul, thank you for waiting. It's all your fault.
No, thanks. I appreciate it. John, thanks for your time. This is really, as you can tell, an issue for us to find ways to build affordable housing. And I think that's what you're hearing pretty clearly from us. We have gone through this process last year. The state budget came up and there was a discussion about removal of the FAR cap. And we had a lot of issues that we raised at that point. Specific overall concern was that the state cap gave us a sort of a backstop against the city's efforts to do whatever they want to do. And so it kind of gave us a layer of insurance. And from that discussion, there were a lot of points that we raised that I think I would want to make sure that are incorporated with the 5 Borough Housing Committee movement, that we are heard on a lot of these issues. We also recently went through a discussion with the Garment District Alliance on the conversion of office space in the Garment District. And a lot of the issues we raised for that zoning text amendment, I think should be incorporated into any communication we send from our board. If there is a letter of conditional support, that those issues are raised. And just as an overview, I think that livability and affordability are kind of our biggest themes. Any increase in FAR would have to be restricted to high density areas with specific protections against special districts like the Clinton Special District and special protections against historic districts. You'll hear more about that when you come to Chelsea. We want to make sure that any increases in FAR are coordinated and don't surpass other existing bonuses that would come as a result of these efforts. You've heard it a couple of times about making sure that we include necessary public services, schools, fire protection, things like that. And another issue that hasn't been raised yet by others is the protection against demolition. In the Garment District, we made special note of the fact that we didn't want to have buildings torn down so that bigger buildings could be built in their place. So
residential buildings.
Residential buildings. So we have a lot of those points that we'll bring forward in a more formal format for you.
Yes, and I think that's very reasonable and in good context to know.
Paul, thank you. Joe, do you mind waiting? I know Mr. Sanchez is on a time limit. I want to make sure we get the public in. Janine, do we have a member of the public waiting to speak?
Yeah, there's three. There's Christine, Sanford, and Elka. I'm bringing them over now.
Thank you, Joe. Do you mind if we try to get them in? Thanks, Joe. Who's up first? Janine?
Christine, she should be on.
Yeah,
Christine, welcome.
thank you, JD. Thank you for this presentation. So I'm not totally clear whether the conversion, commercial conversion is combined with the removal of the cap. Are those two separate proposals or do they go together?
So they do go together in certain instances. So for example, let's say a commercial building has a FAR of 20 and the building owner wants to convert all of it to residential. Well, they can't do that because of the cap. They can
We
only,
understand that.
yeah. So in that case, that's where the cap definitely ties in. The other issue is when if new construction were to be implemented combined with the rezoning, the FAR cap limits how many apartments could be built.
So I'm concerned, I think everybody's concerned about that last piece,
Got
which
it.
could result in a lot of pressure on the height of the existing buildings. So if we have an area which is residential and we want to keep it low because that's the way the zoning here is, it would be better if the removal of the cap was strictly linked to either commercial conversion or commercial zoning. So, if it is an existing zoning, which is the Hudson Yard case, then, the zoning is already there, the FAR is already there, and it's just a mechanism to let it convert from commercial to residential. But I don't think anybody here would want that the existing residential stock be put under pressure and demolished in order to do bigger residential housing. Because when it has been designed, as Dolores and everybody said, it was designed on purpose, that some part were low and some part were high, right? So how could we limit the applicability of this cap to existing residential? That's something which is very, very critical to, I think, our neighborhood.
Yes.
You meant commercial.
Yeah, I mean, excluding residential, that's what I meant. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, again, if the state lifts the cap, the city would then have to map where a higher FAR takes place. And that would go through an entire process and they would be able to identify.
But what we are telling you is that it would be better if the cap was removed by the state, but only already with a restriction, right? If this is in a commercial area for commercial zoning, and if it has affordable housing. So if we had those two restrictions, I think a lot of people would feel way more comfortable with that process and not turning the thing on and off for everything. That makes everyone very nervous.
Well, I definitely understand. Well, we are the 5-borough housing movement. So, I mean, your neighborhood, you've made it very clear what you want, but there are other neighborhoods where they want the ability to have a higher cap. So that has to be balanced by the state. We understand not every neighborhood's the same. Not every neighborhood is designed to have a higher cap, but some neighborhoods do want it. And that's going to have to be determined by the state and the city where it makes sense.
Yeah, but you've shown maps, which our neighborhood is a major factor. So I want to say in this discussion, the generality is good, but the applicability and the details are what makes something politically possible. So I want to be very direct that concept, yes, but what I'm hearing is you keep responding, John, in a general way. That's everybody wants a nice bowl of fruit, but it's how the fruit gets cut up in the end that makes the difference.
Joe, thank you. Good point, but no vegetable metaphors, please. Christine, you raised a good point. That's very important. I want to continue with the public. Elka Fears, do I see you there? Janine?
Yeah, Elka and Sanford.
Okay. Hi, I'm Elka Fears, president of the West 47th 48th Street Block Association. also a 40-year resident of Hell's Kitchen, and one of the most important reasons for being here is our low rise. And having our Clinton special district preserved is on everyone's mind. That's a resident in Hell's Kitchen. Joe brought up the FAR. West of 8th Avenue does go down. And again, you need to revise that map to accurately reflect that. I fully support what Dolores said. There is so much more to just building. It's all the things that go with it, the schools, et cetera, et cetera. I won't repeat it because we're short on time, but again, preservation of our Clinton Special District is of utmost importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Elka. Mr. Miller, Sanford, welcome. You're on.
Hi, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think I have three things I want to say. One is, I do think lifting the FAR cap is just something of like citywide importance. I think realistically, the higher FARs above 12 are most likely going to happen in Manhattan and a handful of neighborhoods in the outer boroughs. But like it's been something the state has tried to change, where various people have tried to change many times in the 50 years that it's been in place, and it's always been very difficult. So I think even if this community board does not intend to like necessarily upzone very much of its existing neighborhoods, which may make sense, it would still be good to send a political message of people in New York, including community boards in Manhattan, are supportive of achieving this goal that will enable more housing to be built across the whole city. My second point is, I just want to echo, like, there are some parts of Community Board 4 that it would be worth experimenting with a higher FAR cap, such as Hudson Yards. And so, like, it's just not possible to do that unless the statewide cap is lifted. So I think that is important to keep in mind, that even if 80% of the land is going to remain at 10 or 12 or below, for that other 20% where we want to experiment, it's very important. Like, you don't get that many opportunities to make a big state policy change like this. So it's important to do it so you have the option later. And third, I just want to say, I would definitely support having some version of mandatory inclusionary housing on all projects built with the higher FAR cap.
Mr. Miller, thank you so much. Mr. Sanchez, I hope you can stay just a few more minutes. We have a few more questions.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good for another 15, 20 minutes.
Thank you. And Joe, thank you for waiting. So Joe, Chris, and Dolores.
So
Joe.
When we write you something, John, the thing is that we have a lot of stacked bonuses in our district. So for example, there's 3 blocks on the west side of 8th Avenue between 42nd and 45th Streets that have a inclusionary housing bonus followed by a theater, a retention or development bonus, right? And if there were a wholesale change of cap, that would mean that a building could go from 10 to 12 to 14.4, and then maybe 2 or 3 more FAR. So we're talking about truly monster buildings, right? These are the kinds of things I think you need to have the organization. You're doing some broad stuff, which is let's get more housing, but to get it over the political finish line, these are the kinds of things that are going to come your way. And I think it's important that you be, number one, sensitive to it, but also respond and think about a more nuanced approach on certain items, because it does create a problem. For example, stacked bonuses, what gets first, second, or third, right? How those things would work. The last piece is, I know they're connected with the conversion and the cap, but I think you need to make the presentation a little bit clearer because they're not always connected, right? So therefore, it's like if you said specifically for existing buildings with a current FAR higher than 12 to enable conversion, that helps people understand it a little bit better. Because I think the last piece is on things like school seats. You have to also factor in, we're a district that has one of the highest numbers of shelter beds in the city. We're number 3 out of 59 community boards. Our school seats with the current humanitarian centers for the asylum seekers, we're maxed out on school seats, for example. That kind of thing You have to sort of have some of that information in there, because the last thing we want is we're maxed out, we have another problem, and now we're going to max out again. Because we've seen commitments made for specific infrastructure that does not get delivered. So I think we have to tie this. If the cap gets lifted, even in a targeted or pilot way, then there should be a requirement to have the infrastructure to go with it. We have not, I can say honestly, we've been in constant rezoning since 2001. We have not seen the city of New York follow through on every commitment that's needed. So that's why you're going to hear from us. It's a great idea, but the devil is how you execute. And if we have the state law saying you can lift the cap, or the cap's lifted, but only if you do A, B, or C, that starts to give people comfort that the infrastructure will come along with it.
Thanks, Joe. Chris, and then Dolores. Chris, you have another?
Yeah, thank you so much. You got to forgive me. I have EMS flying by right now. John, you were district manager at Bronx Community Board 6, right?
Yes.
What neighborhoods are those?
Belmont, East Tremont, West Farms.
And who's the current council member there?
Oswald Feliz.
Okay, cool. So I'm right when I say, like, I kind of heard this language before, especially in 2019, especially as me as a candidate in 22. This sounds a lot like CUF. This sounds like a lot of organizations that it feels like that you're representing an umbrella organization of a larger group of smaller housing groups. Is that correct?
There's housing groups, environmental groups, business groups.
No. People like CUF, Whitney
No,
Hugh,
CUF isn't a
etc.
part of CUF isn't a part of the coalition.
Okay. Look, at the end of the day, in your presentation, I had to do pitches to Fortune 50s and 100s before I got into politics. If I was ever to misuse words, legal would get really upset with me, and we would have to parse words and go into definitions. What you're hearing from my peers, who I respect, and I'm also a 39-year resident of this community. I'm one of the last Hispanic candidates to run in Manhattan. Dude, let me tell you, you need to get your presentation done right, because these individuals, once again, whom I respect greatly, are breaking up your argument for any call to action for support. And I don't know who Sanford Miller is, but because I've never actually seen him on a call before. But to bring somebody in to speak on behalf and call political requests, this board does not do political requests. We represent our neighbors. We represent context. We represent like the nuance and the rooted like things that make Hell's Kitchen very unique. Please listen to Joe Restuccia and listen to JD and Christine, because they're going to provide you a roadmap to success that the presentation that you gave us currently does not help you get to.
Chris, thank you. John, was Mr. Miller a resident of our district? He was. Okay. That answers that. Chris,
I recognize Stanford. He usually comes and calls.
He has
us
been at
NIMBY.
several meetings, to my
He's
knowledge.
been at several meetings, but that was why I raised my hand. He did not identify that he was a resident or an affiliation, et cetera. And I think that, normally when we've been in person, we ensure that we understand where people's affiliations are. So Chris, I understand the sensitivity on that, but I have seen Sanford at meetings. But Sanford, if you're still listening, would be good in future meetings when you are participating, if you at least just identify if you're representing an organization, a block association, or yourself, and if you're a resident. That's always helpful for us. That was the only comment I wanted to make. But John, I wanted to say, I hope that you don't feel that this is a board that sounds antagonistic, or how people would use that phrase too much, NIMBY. This is a board that's trying to be very thoughtful. But again, we're very complicated in this particular community. But more importantly, more so than the complication, we have majority of the stock of what you are targeting, because this is in this corridor of Midtown is where you find many of these types of office buildings. So the sensitivity is not from we do not want. The sensitivity is that we want it to work, and we're not seeing that a wholesale change to the cap does anything but allow for potential unintended consequences, and also where we've seen time and time again across the city where the real estate industry actually is the winner here and not necessarily the folks that are looking for affordable housing.
Thank you, Dolores. I'm sorry, somebody spoke?
Yeah. If you're going to wrap, Judy, I just wanted to have one final comment to echo what Dolores said, and John, to point out, at the beginning of your slide, you recognize that our community board is in the top 10 in production of housing in the city. And this doesn't come by accident. It's because we are thoughtful, we are concise, we are surgical. And so the comments you're hearing tonight are not saying no, they're saying do it in a smart way.
Completely understood.
I just want to make two comments or three. John, first of all, thank you so much for coming and taking these questions. I myself, I am not trustful of the city, so I'm very concerned about giving that power to the city, A, and B, I think I'm a bit troubled that all the supporters of your group have said, fine. I mean, that's kind of blanket. And we're not going to say fine, we're going to say, yes, it's a great idea, but. So you understand that's a little troubling to me that no member of your group has said, let's do it carefully, or let's do it district by district.
They support the overarching goals, but as I mentioned, a Queens Community Board gave us support, but they had several stipulations as well. So we welcome the yes and or yes but. We want some form of this to be included in the state budget. It doesn't necessarily have to be what the governor's proposing. We know it's going to be negotiated. We know it's going to be more surgical. We just don't want this to get lost in the shuffle where no office converts, where we have no affordable housing through offices, where an area like Hudson Yards can't get the cap lifted. We don't want that to just be lost in the shuffle.
Gotcha, John, thank you. And you do understand our concerns about, we don't want to get lost in the shuffle either, so I balance those two things. Any other questions for Mr. Sanchez, who's been so gracious to take us on? Anybody else? I guess not. I think we'll continue this, or somebody want to make a motion? I don't want to keep you.
I just want to note one thing in your slideshow. There is a shot which has, I believe it's West 29th Street in the foreground of low-rise houses. And in the background, you can see the Tower of Manhattan West. That is the Hopper Gibbons house on that street, which is landmarked.
That's an historic district.
It's a historic district. So it seems in poor taste if we're talking about possibly lifting FAR caps. And sometimes, I know not all times, but sometimes height restrictions go with that. One must, especially the NAACP, should know the history of that street. So I think that was just, maybe you want to change that image on your show.
Yeah, so one thing that wasn't in the slides, but if the cap were to be lifted, we wouldn't want historic districts to be touched. Just wanted to let you know that.
Or special district, right?
Right, but considering that that's literally on the Underground Railroad, it's probably not the best slide to use, that's all.
Right. And that was preserved because of the uniform height of the rooftops there.
Right.
So John, you said historic districts would be excluded from this?
Yes.
As well as special districts?
I'm sure that will be negotiated, but that's not what the.
No.
Yeah.
Why? Well, why not?
We're asking what's in your proposal.
Our proposal does not include an exemption for special districts. But of course, if the legislature wants that, they'll make that happen.
I must be honest, that is not an answer. That is stating something, and it's not really, it doesn't, for folks like us who have been in the rezoning wars for 20 something odd years, that is a real estate industry answer, as opposed to we believe in X, Y, or Z. So just keep that in mind when you present, because I find that to be quite troubling.
Yeah. Mr. Sanchez, Hell's Kitchen is a special district. So I guess we need to become a historic district very quickly so we can be excluded.
And remember, I mean, you all know this, there's special districts in other boroughs as well. So that's one reason why all special districts weren't included, but understand the point. Definitely got it. I understand it.
But could you just elaborate, the special districts in other boroughs, why shouldn't they be excluded as well?
Those community boards haven't requested it when we presented to them. I'm not saying others don't want it. I'm just saying the ones that we've presented to so far haven't asked for that specific exemption.
Did they know about that they could get that? Were they aware that it could be a possibility?
I'm pretty sure they're aware. I mean, they're longstanding community members like you all are.
Okay. Mr. Sanchez, thank you so much for this. As you can
Yes,
see,
thank you
there's
for the
a lot of-
opportunity.
lot of discussion. We don't want to keep you. I think we'll probably keep discussing this. You're
Okay.
welcome to stay. What's your schedule like?
I have to hop for Community Board 11 in East Harlem.
Oh.
So that's my next
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
again.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
John.
Bye.
Okay. So this is going to go to the Chelsea land use. I'm sure they're going to have a whole slew of questions. I know, Paul, you're on that committee, so you'll go through this again and with Mr. Sanchez. So as we're continuing to talk about it, Joe, you have your hand up. Dolores, you have your hand up. Joe?
Joe, you muted.
All right. I'm very concerned about those ending facile answers. That I don't feel really comfortable with that. It's sort of like the legislature will figure it out. If your job is to make presentations and build up public support, this is not the means and I mean, Chris, did a whole different story on his head. But I'm saying this is not the means and methods to get public support. It's to listen, to hear, and then to say, we're going to consider this, whatever, incorporate. So I think whatever position we take after it goes to Chelsea land use should be extremely thoughtful and nuanced. And probably, I'm going to recommend that we probably just target it to Hudson Yards as a state pilot program or something and see where the chips lie on this one. Because I don't think this has been thought out fully.
Joe, thanks. Dolores, and then Brian.
So Joe, I'm a little bit surprised that you were only troubled just by that last bit. The whole thing troubles me. This is a one size fits all. Again, this has been a problem that we have seen over and over again, where someone is trying to fix a problem. They see the opportunity. The community here does present answers to a lot of these problems, but only on the surface. I am not sure that it makes sense for this board to actually support the cap being raised at all. Because again, our experience that we have with developers, particularly in this part of Manhattan, this is a very lucrative area. This will allow for all sorts of potential skirt around, workarounds, and add-ins where we don't end up getting the affordable housing that we seek, but we do get higher buildings. And we also end up inadvertently probably pricing a lot of people out of the neighborhoods as a byproduct of all of the conversion with new amenities, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that it makes sense for it to be supported. We had this conversation about the cap last year, and it was clear when we were trying very quickly to get support for the state legislative body to propose lifting the state cap. We as a board did not support that. And I think that we should continue with that same sentiment.
So Dolores, I'm sorry, here's my sort of like general thinking. I would say we give conditional support only in Hudson Yards in any location where the current FAR cap itself is higher than 12. So you are very specific about it, that it must be married with both the affordable housing requirements and with the infrastructure.
With apologies, Joe, my thought here is it's not about support. I think the problem is supporting a blanket statement, one size fits all proposal
I wouldn't support
that
that.
is very wishy-washy. I think it's very clear. It's not a, deny unless. I think it needs to just be a clear statement of what works for this community with no position on supporting the 5-borough proposal. Because again, we can be very clear about where, if this did happen, we have a position.
Right, would consider if if in general, gotcha.
Because I honestly think that supporting or denying makes no sense because this presentation is a one size fits all. I think it is consistent for this board to speak very clearly about our support for affordable housing, our blueprint for opportunities for increasing affordable housing throughout our entire district, and where, if there were a situation that the cap were raised, that may make sense. Simply that, because I think if we actually provide support for that proposal, or we say deny unless, it lumps us in a category that I think that we won't be able to go ahead and remove ourselves from if in the end the legislative outcome is a one size fits all and we've already signed on to it. That's my point of view. So
can I just
Hold on.
interrupt 1 second, JD?
Yeah, but let's let other people get in. Go ahead, Paul.
No, but I just wanted to clarify a point. And Dolores, the struggle I'm having is that last year we did have a lot of discussions about this issue, but we never actually took a position, and we never issued a letter on this. And so I don't want to have us be in that same situation this year where we don't actually formalize our position. So what you're saying is terms I'm agreeing to. But I don't want to end up saying we're not going to take a position on the 5-borough housing commission letter, but maybe we come up with a different strategy on how we make our position clear. So just wanted to clarify that we did not take that position.
I'm sorry, I did not quite understand that, Paul. So are you saying that you think we should take a position on the 5-borough? I just misunderstood. I lost it for a second.
No.
Hold on. I think Dolores, Paul, we're all going to discuss this.
I just called to clarify. I lost my continuity for a second. I didn't hear what he last said. I'm sorry, JD.
Go ahead, Paul.
Dolores, what I'm saying is that we last year did not take a position on the removal of the 12 FAR cap. We're faced with a similar conversation this year. If you're proposing that we don't support 5-borough in one way or another, that we come forward with another motion of some sort. That's all.
Oh, what I'm proposing is not to state our position on the cap, but not to weigh in on the proposal at hand, because I think that because it's so wishy-washy with the one size fits all, if we end up saying we support, we're locked in. If we end up saying deny unless, we're still locked in with maybe our unless is ignored because it's for a broader group. You are correct, and I do agree. This is a great opportunity for us to be on record about what we feel about the protections that the cap gives for our particular district and our needs. But I am concerned if we actually opine and position ourselves with this proposal from this group. That's all.
Okay, we've got two positions here. Brian, thank you for being patient. Brian.
No, not at all. I have to say I agree with Dolores. I just want to point out that the 5-borough movement is a lobbying group. If you haven't been to their website yet, go and read their language. And again, I'm just not entirely clear who's footing the bill for it. I'm not comfortable with supporting or, for that matter, commenting on their motion to the state budget. If you also look at the website, you see that if it's something you support, you can actually go on and send a letter to your elected officials supporting their organization. So I don't think it's something that our committee should be supporting, but I think it's fair and valid for us to put forth our position, which is very nuanced and very informed and very educated, as you could hear from everyone saying here, and comment on that. And Paul, I would think that last year when there was the discussion of lifting the cap, I think our board wasn't even asked to comment on it. It inserted itself into that conversation at the very last minute. There was not a robust discussion about it. And so it was kind of rushed. And I guess we are finding ourselves somewhat rushed again here. So I just think that collectively, we've put a lot of thought into FAR zoning within our community, and we should adhere to that, make that position as Dolores suggested, put forth, but not support this.
I want to make my comment, Chris, if you don't mind. Thanks, Brian. I think I want to put this out there. I think we should make a statement to our electeds in the form of a res or a letter listing our very strong reservations and concerns about this proposal. So I'm going to put that out there because I think we should inform Brad and our electeds in Albany that we have deep concern about this proposal. So I just want to put that out there for consideration. Chris.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I posited those questions to John because this is definitely not a progressive movement. It's way too tight. Oswald Police is a progressive in the Bronx. John Sanchez is not. John Sanchez is definitely a lobbyist. The bottom line is this. Dolores is right. And Paul is right. We should come out stating something firmly. And Brian brings back really great context as to how this committee first had to respond. This feels like an idea straight out of Bar Bond downtown. The fact that certain areas
out of what?
Bar Bond. It's a place where people in City Hall like to hang out. The fact that there are areas in the map that John presented overlap with alliance with that City Hall area, I think is key to note. This seemed like a full move by the real estate board of New York to pretend as if they're working as a progressive or liberal housing front.
Chris, let me ask you, Brian, on the group, were there real estate?
They don't need to make it. All they need to do is create a shell company or a holding, like a payment group within the state, and they'll work through the 5 boroughs coalition. That's where the money will go through traditionally when you're lobbying.
One of the groups was the New York Real Estate Board. Was that one of the supporters? No.
It's the building. It's the building Congress. It's the folks who are supporting unions. It's the folks who came out and protested against the stadium with their hard hats.
Gotcha, John. Okay. Oh, Chris, thank you.
Yeah.
Paul and Dolores.
I think Dolores had her hand up before me.
Yeah, I just wanted to first off, I think it's not really appropriate for us to assume, where people are, what their intentions are, et cetera. We had a presentation, and we're trying to ascertain, based on past conversations with this committee and the community, what would be the appropriate response. So based on JD's suggestion and the other comments made by Brian and Joe, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a.
It's great, but could you just hold off? We have one more comment from Paul and then make that motion, Dolores, if you don't mind. Just to round out the conversation. Is that okay?
I'm fine with her I think I know what she's gonna. I'm fine with her making the motion, and we can have discussion on the motion.
Gotcha. Okay. Go, Dolores.
Yeah, this was like telepathy there. Paul and I were like, we were agreeing there through the Zoom. So my motion is that we write that we have reservations about the presentation. However, recognizing that there is a movement towards removing the cap, we have, for the reasons that Joe is going to go ahead and recite because he took notes, that we're concerned about what that intention was. However, if there were such a thing to happen, where that might work within our community. And I think the other stipulations that we need to put in, not stipulations, but the other concerns we need to put in is any such potential upzoning needs to come with careful consideration of services and support around the communities that may end up having upzoning.
Thanks, Doris. Now, how are you phrasing the
Joe's gonna
motion?
go ahead and Joe's gonna go ahead and outline it, right?
I understand that he's going to give the details, but you are phrasing the motion that we thank them for coming, but we are opposed to this, or we have.
No, the wording that I used, Joe, JD, and again, this is what we should all discuss as a committee is that we have concerns about their presentation. And I don't think that it's support or deny. I still think we need to be neutral to the proposal, but like you had stated, clearly ensure that our Albany electeds understand the reservations we have about the raising of the cap.
So we cannot support this unless.
I'm not
No.
proposing that deny unless, mainly because of the fact of what I stated from the get-go, is I'm concerned that it still can say that, one of the stipulations were matched that community board 4 raised. Okay, so they actually are, they're okay with it. I think I'm trying to propose that we're neutral, or that we are not opining on their presentation. However, it has raised concerns for our community based on the fact that we have special districts, that we have additional bonuses that could be added on, that we don't have the services to support all the additional, et cetera, et cetera. So, Paul?
Gotcha. I want to weigh in on that, but Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Dolores, you took a different tack than I thought you were going to take.
Oh,
So,
okay, sorry.
So I would like to say that I thought you were going to go in the direction of, we don't take a position on them. So a group came and did a presentation to us. We don't have to send a letter to them except for thank you for your time, and that can be the end of it. But this does open the door for possibility for us to write a letter to our state elected officials to say, there are discussions once again about removing the state cap on residential FAR cap of 12. These are the issues that we as a community board take on that issue. And if you're going to discuss it with anybody, whether it's with 5 Borough or the Real Estate Board of New York or anybody, these are the concerns we have. And any removal of a cap should have stipulations. Christine raised the point. No,
Paul, that's what I wanted to say. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. So, all right. So I say, let's just, we can just thank 5 Borough for their time. That's a sweet letter. Thank you very much. Done. They asked us if we would sign on. They didn't even ask us technically to sign on as a supporter of their organization. So we don't need to respond to that. But I think this opens the door for us to talk to our state elected officials in a formal way, which we did not do last year, and make sure that we take a stand on that.
Okay, I second that.
Oh, I wasn't making a motion. I'm a chair.
I know you weren't, but Paul, you're articulating what I was trying to. Sorry, it's just like, having a hot flash. Sorry.
John, before you make the list, I am trying to figure this out. I mean, are other groups proposing the removal of the cap, Paul, as far as you know?
I mean, I don't know of any other group that's making a formal presentation to eliminate the cap, but this came up in last year was a different strategy on how to do it. This year is a strategy. Next year will be yet again a strategy. We know that, that as Joe can attest to, that there are builders who want to build more, and we have talked for a long time about the restriction of 6 FAR, and we're not even at 12 at some places. We talk about a need for affordable housing, and this avenue is opening up again for us.
I hear that, yeah. But this is a group that is pushing, a large coalition is pushing this. So should we not say, thank you for the presentation we heard tonight? This is an issue now we need to discuss. We have all these concerns and reservations. Is that a way to approach it?
I would suggest that we just thank them for their, I would suggest we thank them for the presentation, say we have many serious concerns about the nature of the presentation and it's very general and not specific, and thank them. And then a second letter, which is we write to our state electeds that lays out the specifics of the things that we deal with all the time, right? Because I will say the very name 5 Borough, when the majority of the FAR of 12 is in Midtown, East and West, is sort of like trying to brand something to be more than it is. I don't believe for a fact for a moment that anybody in Riverdale or Mott Haven is saying, please build us buildings of 18 or 22 FAR. It's not going to happen. And that's not the nature of how politics works in the city. So I want to propose the following, that we, from a broad point of view, sent to our electeds, that we consider lifting the cap for existing commercial buildings that are currently over the 12 FAR, right? For conversion, as long as there is a component that is for permanently affordable housing with a tax incentive. Like that's just one point. So that would be like a large commercial building in our district that exists today. It's like 14.4 or something, and that could get converted from commercial to residential, if and only if you have affordable housing as a part of it. The second one is consider in Hudson Yards areas, I'm going to say X and Y, I don't have them in my head exactly. Where
What?
Okay, it actually is area D, but I don't want to guess it too much on there. That it's with FARs between 18, existing FARs between 18 to 33, but they're limited to only 6 residential FAR, that we consider allowing a full residential, a cap of above 12 for residential, where there's an existing high density zoning. The third thing is that
I'm sorry, Joe, can I just pause you for that one?
Yeah.
You said, so where there's existing FAR of 18 to 24, raise the residential from 6 to 12.
No, where there's an existing FAR from 18 to 33, right? That and is currently limited to 6 residential FAR, right?
Yeah.
That we would consider a good pilot area to raise the FAR above 12 in that location.
Above 12. Okay,
Right.
I wasn't sure if you capped at 12 there.
No, above 12. The
Yep,
next thing
thank you.
is that anytime this is done, that there's a requirement in the state law that requires infrastructure and services to be part and parcel of that action. Because we're not going to get back into we build and there's no school seats, and we build and there's no police station. And then the last piece, which is I got to figure out how to word it properly, in locations, and we'll list them where we have stacked bonuses, meaning Hudson Yards, district improvement bonus, Eastern Rail Yards bonus, the theater bonus, and inclusionary. Now that's all got to get thought about or sorted, because the last thing we want is to have X plus Y plus Z, and all of a sudden you're, through the roof. So that's a more thoughtful thing. And any action taken should not undercut those special zoning districts and their specific requirements. That's the sort of like piece to pull together.
And historic district.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll put that too. Yeah.
I second both letters.
Okay, so now we can have a discussion. I'm still very concerned about any telegraphing any support for this removing of the cap. I mean, we have to trust the city. We have to trust that there's going to be a permanent affordable component in there. There's no guarantee of any of that. No guarantee at all.
But JD, the mayor's already put out that there would be a permanent affordable component in conversions for office buildings. They put that out in writing.
Yeah, and
Right.
JD.
And he's got 2 years left. I mean,
Yeah, but JD, if I can respond to that too, I recall last year, the big thing is, the state cap of 12 is the backstop against the city. And I think that what we want to avoid is the state saying, remove the cap and leave it up to the city. What I think we want to say is,
in a blanket way,
if you're going to remove the cap, it can only be done with these 3 conditions. And then the city can have to figure it out from there. But it's a broad enough statement that the state would do it, but the city would then have some restrictions on it. So we don't eliminate the entirety of the backstop.
I like that, Paul. And also it has to go through the community board before any kind of change can be.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that the state is not going to pass language that says go to the community board, but the state.
Paul, I'm kidding.
Oh, okay.
But I like that gets a little harder about Chris Bryant. Chris, go ahead.
The backstop's incredibly important, and Paul's right. The state will not say community board. They will use blanket language like must go back to the city. It would be our responsibility to have it come back to community board and our district managers. Look, I think if I was going to make a lawyer's argument to Albany, I would say I've received multiple letters from community boards. And then an elected official would say, oh yeah? Like which ones? And then somebody like one of the lobbyists would say, oh, Manhattan Community Board 4, right? And so in that moment, that's an answer that is sufficient for an elected official. Oh, Manhattan Community Board 4 wrote a letter. Okay, great. And so if we directly acknowledge that they presented and that we appreciate it, it's going to be used against us. And so that's what my concern is. And so I echo JD's concerns that he's voiced, because I know exactly how it's going to get played. It will get played and used against us.
Thanks, Chris. Brian.
Yeah, just a comment and also had a question. Joe can explain this. Five Borough movement does state in its plan, the only geographic region in the 5 boroughs that is mentioned in its plan is Manhattan south of 96th Street. So it's problematic. I'll just say that. The question I had, because I am concerned about removing that backstop of 12 FAR. If we look at Hudson Yards and we look at, 18 to 33, which is commercial FAR, which I'm assuming is in area D, how you stack a residential building so you have exposures and ample, you would create a narrower building than a wider, thicker building where you'd have all this interior space. So if we're giving 18 FAR or 33 FAR to a residential building, it's going to make a very large tower if we consider that the super talls that everyone rallies against, the residential ones on West 57th Street, already have a 12 FAR. So my concern is, and maybe I'm misunderstanding this, how does that manifest itself physically if we give residential 33 FAR in Hudson Yards? What does that mean? And I also think it's important that we have this extended conversation regarding this, because let's be honest, the 5 borough plan is specifically all about our area. They're looking at Hudson Yards and the Garment District. So I think it's appropriate we're blogging this.
So Brian, on the construction part, you're not going to build a super tall for a couple of economic reasons. They're really expensive to build and they only work as super high-end condos, right? So you're not going to get, and the ownership along 11th Avenue right now are really like normal experienced developers, not the folks who buy this kind of, crap and do this stuff and then like try to exit very quickly. The sites are, some of them are quite large, they're half a block. That would mean most likely the building form would be 2 towers, not 1, because physically you need to get more exposure, like you said. It doesn't mean that there will not be folks. Today, you can build a 60 to 80 or 100-story building on those sites today. So
understood.
Yeah, I mean, but it's going to drop, the cost will go up so high as you get to those super talls. You're not going to do it if you're a Gotham or a Moynihan, you're not going to do that kind of stuff. You don't build that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would echo that, Brian, that if there is a removal of a cap and it requires a mandatory inclusion of affordability, they can't afford to build a super tall with 60 units in it that they sell for $25 million a piece, because they're going to have affordability factors in there. So the construction cost would offset, I think.
I also think, I think Paul mentioned it, and Dolores also brought it up, the balance between livability and development is very important to keep in this letter. And secondly, the fact that Community Board 4, thank you, Joe Restuccia, is in the forefront of developing affordable housing. And we're doing it in a way that balances that livability with development. I think that's an important thing to emphasize. And to Chris's point, good point. I think we are, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but we want to address this very much to Brad, Linda, the folks in Albany, our representatives.
Yeah, specifically since Linda's now chair of housing. So Linda,
Yeah.
Tony, Brad.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a motion to write 2 letters. The first, just thanking the organization, and the second is to go through with if a cap were to be built with the 3 conditions that Joe just articulated. So is there more on that?
We had in historic districts, special districts, that there definitely be any kind of rezoning subject to ULURP. And then balancing this livability and development. That's what I heard subsequent to the 3 items put in.
And that we've been in the forefront of doing this, so we're doing something right. Dolores and
So
O'Brien,
I
you have
want to go back to Chris's point and my original thought about neutrality. I'm very curious how the other committee members feel about writing a letter that thanks the presenter and being on record. I'm just, again, I can't speak to whether or not it gets used in any way against us, et cetera. But my initial concern about the neutrality, I'm wondering if there's any other thoughts from some of the other committee members on the first letter as a thank you, the second letter as Joe just outlined.
I think we generally don't write a letter thanking a presenter unless it's part of the larger letter. So I think this would be a new thing. So I don't know.
But Joe made a proposal for 2 letters.
I know, and let's reconsider that. Is it necessary?
Well, hold on. Robert's rules suggest that we would take a vote. So because Joe added another letter and Dolores's was 1 letter with further detail from Joe in a second, Joe proposed something outside of the voting order. So we would first still have a motion from Dolores that was.
Well, Chris, sorry to interrupt you. We ended up just having Joe make the motion on both, and I second both of them. I'm
okay. So then we would have.
I'm retracting on that based on your comment. So here's, and I apologize, JD and Paul, because it sounds like we've made your Zoom call very disorderly by trying to be orderly. So can we just deal with the motion on the detailed letter to our electeds and then have a conversation after that about the potential second letter?
Yes, we can. Would you restate the motion, Dolores or Paul, and then Joe add your point?
The motion is to write a letter to our electeds to say that there's been additional conversations about raising the state cap. Our community has concerns about raising that cap for the reasons that Joe had just previously outlined, as well as if there is any such raising of the cap, we are open to, on a trial basis or an experimental basis, the specific area of Area D of Hudson Yards where it can support that type of upzoning.
That's great. Can we say we have strong reservation? Can we make it strong?
Sure.
Very strong.
Joe, thank you. And Joe, the point?
Yeah. So the points are consider lifting the cap in existing commercial office buildings that are currently higher than 12 FAR. For conversion purposes, only if for residential purposes, only if there's an affordable housing component. Consider a certain area of Hudson Yards to be with existing FARs from 18 to 33, which is limited to 6 residential FAR to raising the cap in that area, but require infrastructure and services such as school seats, and we'll list out what they are, police and such like that. Be mindful of the fact that we have stacked bonuses in our special zoning districts, Hudson Yards DIB, Eastern Rail Yards, theater bonuses, and not undercut or disturb those special districts and how their bonuses work. Anything is subject to ULURP and rezoning to implement, and we are most concerned about balancing development and affordable housing and livability.
And Joe, the affordable housing component, you want it to be permanent?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just say it's permanent always. I forget to say it. Yeah, got it.
And do you want to give a percentage or anything like that? Mixed affordability?
I will grab our regular language, which is 30% affordable, along with a range of incomes. We have that stock language we use for years now.
Great. Okay, so we have a motion, we have a letter. Any addition to that letter, anything we left out, Paul?
I just want to make sure that Dolores and Joe both raised this point, and I think Chris echoed it too. We have had great success here in Community Board 4, and like, let's take some pride at the outset that our tone is not anti,
right?
It's a positive tone.
Very good. I agree. That's great. So we have a letter to be written to the electeds. Now, again, this is a letter that's coming from us, but I believe it's also is going to be input from Chelsea. Correct?
Yes. Now, whether or not Chelsea may, I was going to raise this at the next letter discussion rather than this letter discussion. I don't think Chelsea's going to have a problem with this letter going to elected officials. It's the next one that might be more complicated, but.
So this is our letter.
This letter could come just out of Hell's Kitchen land use.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So Paul, go ahead, raise your next point then.
No. We'll finish discussion on this motion and on this letter. Let's get this letter done.
Okay, so we have a motion. We have things that are going to go in this letter from the Hell's Kitchen Land Use Committee. It's going to go to our electeds. All in favor of this? Anybody opposed to it? Anybody present not eligible? So the letter carries. Now, Paul, did you have a proposal for another letter, or Joe?
Well, there was a motion for a second letter to write to the 5 Borough Housing Commission to thank them for their time. And there was some reservation that even that thank you letter might be used against us in some nefarious way. So whether or not we write a letter thanking them, whether we say something in the letter, whether we copy 5 boroughs on our letter to the elected officials, like the motion was made to write a letter to thank them for their time. And that's the motion.
I would just say we write a letter thanking them for their time, but note that the proposal is quite general, and we decided that we will be writing directly to our state elected officials with a much more detailed, nuanced letter regarding the proposal to lift the cap. Sort of like putting it out there, saying, here's what we're doing, just as a matter of courtesy.
Okay, so we have a motion to write a second letter to Mr. Sanchez to thank him for coming. So we have a motion. Do we have a second on that? Well, we don't have a second. Oh, we do. We have a second on it. Okay. Any discussion about this letter? It's kind of unusual.
Who's the second?
Yadira. Yadira made a second. So discussion about this. This is kind of, we generally don't do this, but Joe, you point out as a courtesy.
It's courtesy, that's all.
Okay. So Dolores?
Paul actually just inadvertently provided what could be a happy compromise that we copy them on the letter we write to our electeds. I don't know how people feel about that as opposed to writing the second letter. However, we just had a second on the motion, so we'll have to vote on it. But copying them on our letter specifically to the electeds informs them that we did not take a position.
Okay, rather than sending a thank you, we just send him this letter saying, we hate you and we're not doing, is that what you propose?
No, the guy presented very well. And I don't hate them,
No,
and I don't hate what they're saying. I'm just saying maybe if we copy them on the letter, it serves the purpose, as Joe was stating, as a common courtesy, acknowledging that they were here because we're copying them on a response to the conversation, not a response to their position. Anyway, just a thought.
I think we should actually go ahead. Paul?
No, Chris was speaking.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Can't see.
Thank you. Don't worry, it's because I have my video off because I'm still actually walking. So the co-chair and the former chair of the board have it right. So I'm going to make an argument that we vote this motion down, mainly because we cannot trust this organization to utilize our letter appropriately. And when we write letters, and I've been on this board now for almost 7 years, actually I'm on my 7th year, hold on,
Chris,
JD.
stop, hold on. Please be, which letter are you talking about? Are you
I'm
the
talking about
thank you
what's
letter?
currently proposed, thanking the 5 boroughs.
I'll withdraw the motion. It's not worth it to have further conversation.
Oh,
Okay,
Easy enough.
motion has
Thank
been.
I will happily
Motion
withdraw
has
my
been
second.
Yadira, you're great. Thank you.
Can I ask, should we CC them on the letter?
Yes,
to
of course,
states?
yes.
I see nods
Okay,
on
good.
that. Terrific. That's a CC then.
I'm sorry, I just want to
Okay.
make a note. Sanford Miller does have his hand up in the public, if you want me to bring him over.
Of course.
Okay.
Mr. Miller, are you there? Not yet.
He should be over shortly.
Okay.
Moving now. I feel like the Willy Wonka movie. I can see him coming across to the screen.
Hi.
Welcome back, Mr. Miller. Welcome back.
First, just to answer the earlier question, I am a resident of the district. I live in the Clinton Special District. Second, I want to say I had never heard of the 5 borough movement until I saw it on the agenda for this meeting, and I Googled it, and they do seem like a lobbying organization, and I think Chris's idea to not give them anything is smart, in terms of like personally addressing that group. However, on the FAR cap, which I think is a separate issue from the 5 borough movement, to me, the important thing is like, when like Albany dealing with the FAR cap, like if they change it in, Hudson Yards, and they do a pilot program, and then any other community board in the city or this community board wants to increase the FAR cap of any other area within the city, is that going to require another piece of legislation? Like these pieces of legislation that the state level to get the FAR cap changed are not going to be easy or simple. So I think that to me is the important reason to just do it once for everywhere. And it's going to be very, very difficult to increase FAR caps meaningfully if every time a FAR cap is increased in a certain area of the city, that comes with like a specific piece of state legislation to do that. Like the city ULURP process is a reasonably involved process already. Requiring state legislation on top of it is going to add immensely to the difficulty. Versus if it's just the ULURP, it's still a ULURP, still a quite involved process that involves the community board, but it's going to be much more possible for this community board and other community boards to have flexibility in the future to say, we do want, this area and this area to have those higher FAR caps.
Just FYI, Sanford, normally pilot programs are done to create a beachhead to try to figure out what to do. And one of the things I certainly remain concerned about here is there's a lot of political issues around this. We don't want the whole ship to sink because other locations will be out of their minds about this. And we are at least trying to take a nuanced position. So you may get serious homeowner neighborhoods just politically mobilizing, saying, don't do this at all. Whereas if it's done in a sort of surgical way, you do this and then you can amend in different ways going forward. It actually creates a precedent that helps. And that's why those of us who have been involved in the zoning stuff for a while realize the wholesale changes are always harder as opposed to trying to get something done. And then you build on what you get done. So just think about that in the future, that it's an old strategy we've used on our board to try to get something done and then go from there.
I hear you. I just wonder if those like neighborhoods in like Long Island and Westchester, especially Long Island, that are like
the
skeptical
governor's already
of Hochul's budget. Are they going to win them over by
The governor's
saying,
already
the FAR cap
exempted.
increase?
The governor's already exempted everything outside the city from this discussion. She knew where the politics were. She exempted it.
Yeah, this cap only exists in cities over 1 million.
Right. They made it on purpose to get rid of that opposition.
Yeah. Mr. Miller, thank you so much for those comments. Thank everybody tonight. Let's now talk about 96 Square Gardens being put in Hudson Yards and continue this discussion for another 4 hours. This has been an important discussion. Brian, thank you for joining us. I know you've been traveling, but I appreciate you. We all appreciate you joining us. Everybody.
Wouldn't miss
any
it.
other topics?
Motion to adjourn?
We have a motion to adjourn. Do we have a second?
Second.
Yes, the second.
Anybody opposed?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night.